EUB working, I think. They're working this room. Very good. All right, so the next item is item 5, public comment. I don't think we have anybody signed up. So we're going to move item 8 up to the next item. That would be receive a report and discuss underground utility locations and relocation activities and electric customer connections related to downtown redevelopment activities.
Blair McGinnis will do this.
Blair is going to do that report for us.
I just wanted to share a few facts with you on what the updates are for the downtown development and what we kind of talked a little bit about earlier on what we tasked our contractor to do. Just a reminder, the development area, there's phase 1 through 5. Our downtown area is currently served by McKenzie 4, 6, and 7 circuits right now. What LP&L has is a CIP that is tasked with installing electrical facilities in an underground duct bank, which includes power cables, transformers, switches, and enclosures if any are needed. And then once that's installed, we'll remove the existing overhead infrastructure. To date, $1.4 million has been spent or encumbered. 1.1 is available, and $500,000 will be part of next year's budget. It'll roll into that. Just kind of an update on the phases that have been worked and are currently being installed. Is phase 1, underground conduits installed, electric cables been installed, terminated. It has been energized, currently fed off McKenzie 15.5. Phase 2, the underground conduit, cabling, and terminations are complete. The system has not been energized as yet. Phase 3, underground conduit being installed. If anybody's driven downtown,
What does that mean exactly, Mr. Gibbs, on phase 2? When you say it's been pulled and terminated, that means what exactly?
the underground cable, the primary cable, has been pulled through the conduit and brought up into junction boxes and terminated.
But the power is still going through the overhead line.
Correct.
In phase 2. Okay. Well, that's what I thought. I just want to make sure.
Yes, sir.
Is this on? Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Ison?
what is that? Why is that? We just explain why you want to energize it if it's already.
We're waiting on some cooler weather. In order to take the existing load off the infrastructure in phase 2, we'd have to move that load to another circuit.
Okay.
That circuit is Co-op 1, 15.1. That circuit is close to being overloaded. I don't know what the percentage is, but during the summer, of course, the load's higher. We're waiting for cooler weather. In order to do that, we probably expect in the next 2-3 months.
Do you mind real quick, since we're going over the update, to go back to the map on the other side? I didn't have time to do it. Is the right hand of the page the interstate?
Yes.
Civic
Right at the
Center's
top
up
is
there,
later.
left of 5.
Yes, the interstate's right here. Avenue Q is in between the purple and the red. Broadway is, I believe, that street right there. It dissects.
One thing I want to note, not Blair, not you, I just want to note, because I might reference it later, the downtown tip does not match the underground redevelopment phase plan. Now, you may not know this, but the downtown tip goes all the way up to University along the freeway. There is some differences in the boundaries of the downtown tip and the plan to bury underground electric circuits.
Well, and I'll add to that, phase 3, is that correct, Jared? They went all the way to to 19th Street?
They did bring it down to 19th Street, or they are putting in the conduit right now.
Underground conduit is coming down Avenue J all the way to 19th as a part of phase 3.
So does that cover all the way to 19th?
Yeah, 19th would be this, not the exact southern boundary, but the straight, the horizontal line you see there.
Right. So does phase 3 go more southern? Is that what you're saying?
I really don't know the reason. What was the reason, Jared?
I think they have a little extra money available to go ahead and bring the conduit down to 19th Street. And haven't seen an updated map for the phases from the city. This is the most up-to-date map we have to this date. But I do know they, along Avenue J for phase 3, they did extend the conduit down to 19th Street.
And
That was not part of the original plan.
Was that part of downtown depot thought process?
That might have been the idea down the road, yes, sir.
So kind of believe between Avenue J and west to phase 1, there seems to be a little leave out potentially south of phase 2. Is there a plan for that?
That's United Methodist Church. They actually own this entire block right here. That's the only reason why there's a.
South of the yellow.
Oh, here? No plans on where.
No, the phasing was developed by the TIF. This phasing map was developed a long time ago by the TIF. This wasn't necessarily developed by LP&L.
No.
This was their instruction of what the order of these phases would be to us.
Maybe what they were thinking there, I remember seeing some of the presentations on that, was there was going to be a pedestrian promenade at Avenue J. I think that's, unless I'm mistaken, so that may be part of the thing. Go ahead, Mr. McGinnis, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Earlier, David talked a little bit about the contractor that we have engaged. What LP&L has, what the information that we have, based on our GIS system, is the number of meters, how many are commercial versus resident, number of overhead transmission, transformer locations, and number of blocks. This is what we pulled out of our GIS system. So with this information in this graph, we task a contractor to develop what the service voltage, single or three-phase, and the service rating or conductor size, which will tell us what our amperage availability is.
They're determining, sorry,
Mr. Rice.
they're determining this information where? At each transformer, at
Each meter,
at each meter?
yes.
So for every 500 and some odd meters, 518 meters, 640.
We have 604 meters in that map. The GIS department went in, counted the number of meters that we have in that information.
So you've engaged an engineering firm to come in for each of those 604 meters and determine basically the amps that are serviced right now.
Correct. What the voltage is, whether it's 122 away,
Yeah.
single phase, three phase, 12240, and tell us what is there on the secondary side.
On our side.
Yes. Some of the challenges that we have faced and with the changeover of going underground versus overhead, where to place transformers, where to place the secondary enclosures, switches, pedestals. You'll see in some of the pictures here in just a minute, riser placement on the buildings. If we go underground through the alley, put the transformer out on the sidewalk, go down the alley, come up the back of the building, you'll see some of the challenges that we face here in just a minute. Digging down the alley. Are there other utilities in the alley that are underground? Sewer, water, things like that. One of the other questions is if super blocks are created, if we initially go in and trench down the alley and install electrical service, if somebody buys the whole block, do we have to come back and pull that infrastructure out and reconfigure it? Service points. Typically, service points are at the weatherhead, which are up on the side of the building. Sometimes the service points are at the meter. There's just different things. The big one would be the voltage, and that's what we're trying to address with the contractor that we have engaged. This is just somewhat of a simple example of if we were to come down an alley and create a riser system. You know, you've got your standard overhead infrastructure. Your wire goes to the weatherhead, which is this portion of the equipment down to your meter. We come in and install our underground system. That little box was green on my slide. Turned out orange today.
I can't see the color anymore.
I didn't mean that for any reason. Oh, goodness. So once the underground infrastructure is installed, you have a riser that comes up the side of the building and jumps over from one weatherhead to the next. And then you remove your overhead infrastructure. So that's a simplified scenario that will cover quite a few of the situations, but not all of them. And this is an example of that. The Wells Fargo parking garage, this transformer, you can see the sidewalk, transformer setting next to the sidewalk goes underground. LP&L installed, the two conduit on either side. You can see the conduit in the middle is white. That's infrastructure that was already there that came from overhead. The weatherhead's up top. Some of the same, part of the same alley infrastructure, the transformer setting out on the sidewalk feeds a riser in this area right here. So it comes from the transformer and goes down the alley a little ways and feeds that building. Down the same alley, you can see the top of the building. This building right here is part of the First United Methodist Church infrastructure.
Mr. McGinn, can I ask you?
Yes, sir.
How deep is that usually trenched? I mean, is there a standard?
Jared?
Primary is 4.5 feet, low voltage secondary is 3 feet.
Thank you.
Mr. McGinnis?
Yes, sir.
How many properties in phase one have been switched over to the underground service?
First United Methodist Church, Wells Fargo United Way, Caston House,
Early Learning
and
Center.
Early Learning Center.
And really, the Wells Fargo tower was actually switched over before these phases began.
Can you go back to the slide where how many meters there are in phase one? Please. So we've got 125 meters and 5 that switched over. And of those 5, before I go on, how many of them are remodels? How many of them switched over when they're doing new construction?
Basically, Methodist Church, they did their own renovation, so we worked with them for that changeover. And the customers along the Target block between Main and Broadway, Avenue Q, Avenue O, that was all part of the master block that was originally targeted by development. And that's really the only thing that spurred this. I'm sorry?
Record docks.
And regular docks, of course, that's regular docks, that's not phase one, but.
Regular docks
Yes,
is
sir.
phase 2. So,
Right.
so none of the 5 that have switched over yet downtown overall didn't still on their own.
No, basically, our changeovers to this point have been based on 2 things: development or redevelopment, and system improvement.
So at what point did we stop serving the other 120 years of overhead service that we're trying to carry out? Because we already spent the money for underground.
That would be, I don't know, David?
Yeah, that's the problem we're trying to address here, Mr. Ison, is how do we fund the rest of the conversion project? Do we set up a fund through the city? Do we pay for it through our capital improvements program to the extent that it's legal for us to do so? That's the problem we're trying to address. I think we're moving in that direction. We just haven't got to the finish line yet.
I wonder if any other utility has 2 forms of service downtown.
I wouldn't know. Don't know.
From what I've seen in the downtown area, this Lubbock is not too different than a lot of the other older cities in West Texas. Abilene was that way when I was there, and you know, Amarillo had a lot of this stuff at one time. I think some of this has been converted already. But some of these next few slides that you will see, we're going to have some challenges down here, but it's not insurmountable challenges. It's just a matter of us deciding that we're going to do it.
Mr. McGinnis, I might ask you to introduce your associate there.
I'm sorry, this is Jared Hughes. He is part of the distribution engineering department, and his area of responsibility is the downtown area.
Thank you.
I'm sorry about that.
Appreciate your
No problem.
Jared comes to
Mr.
the
Bell.
board meetings regularly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jordan. Mr. Bell has a question.
Mr. McCullough, so what I heard you say was we still to be determined who's going to pay, where the funds are going to come from. Has it been determined as of yet whether any of the building owners are going to be expected to pay for any of the changeover or not? Or is that still to be determined?
No, I think that's part of the discussion that we're having right now.
Well, my feeling is that the building owners shouldn't pay.
No, Mr. Bell, our preference would be for us to work these conversions over as the buildings are renovating, you know, getting new electrical wiring and new meter bases and so forth, and then we can work with them. That's what works best. But you know, I can't envision the entire downtown area that we're talking about redeveloping within the next few years. So there is some incentive for us to go ahead and facilitate this and make it happen, because we can get rid of a lot of the unsightly, older, less reliable circuits that we've got downtown that really need to be retired.
Right. Well, it's part of the argument is this old infrastructure that was needed to be upgraded anyway?
Yes.
Should it be funded out of the LP&L budget, or is it redevelopment, and should it come out of the city budget? Legally, can we do it? I mean, I've heard that issue come up, but all that's still to be determined.
Well, I think the pictures that you've seen so far where we just run our own weatherhead up and jump it over, I think we haven't changed the delivery point, and I think Richard's comfortable with us continuing that program, assuming that the board wants to approve the funding for that and council would think.
Now, I get a question for Mr. Kessler. Is this little bit of studying we've done, what we've done so far, is that setting a precedent for who will ultimately pay for all these reconnects?
No, sir, I believe that's independent. I believe that the electric utility board has indicated to staff that they would like these properties and types of connections quantified, so that whoever would be, who did have the authority and jurisdiction to set up the program could understand what they were doing and the amount of that project.
Well, Mr. McGinnis, I may be getting ahead, you may cover it, so just stop me for him, but I assume at some point we have a lot of close work between LP&L, the city, and the master developer, because sometimes there's things that can't be publicly announced that are going on development-wise. We may, some work may be done, and then 6 months later we say, oh man, I wish I'd known about that, I would have done this different. We've heard about super blocks and all that sort of thing. Are you going to cover that later?
No, we,
Did already cover it.
You broached the topic.
What I would like to say is Jared attends all these meetings, as was mentioned a minute ago. He asked them at one of our meetings, where are the future super blocks? What super blocks have been identified? And there was silence in the room. You see, we hear crickets chirping. So to our knowledge, there are no super blocks out there. Now, if y'all know of some, please let us know before we spend any money.
Well, I know they're planning some, because we discussed it on the stormwater side, or wastewater side. So I know they're planning some somewhere, so there is like major miscommunication. I think that's my frustration with this whole thing. There's just no communication, and I feel like we're doing this and putting all these underground, which I think is a great thing, but we're just kind of doing it without a plan. We're just doing it. So that's my frustration with this whole thing.
Mr. McGinnis?
yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there definitely was a plan originally, and the master developer designated where, through using an engineering service, of course, where those main trunk lines need to go. That's really kind of where we are. I do believe that the master developer knows where at least some of the super blocks are. And I think, Mr. Hughes, was that discussed at that meeting that they were going to get with him and try to get that information?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of partially discussed, and I brought up the fact that, hey, I'd like to have access to that if possible, so we can kind of help design our facilities. And, you know, kind of got a little quiet, but then I sent an email follow-up to like Brandy Bass, the TIF board organizer, meeting organizer. And she said, yeah, I'll forward that on, power to be, and get back to you. I haven't heard anything back yet.
We have another meeting coming up.
That would be a good time to bring it up. I will say this, though. I know when this process first started back in 2012, there were 3 blocks identified. The first one we all know about is the master block between Broadway and Main, west of Wells Fargo. But there are the other 2 that were shown on that map. Were one is where City Substation is now. It's an old XL substation off Avenue M. That's since been de-energized and it's actually being taken apart as we speak. And the other one was the old Community Health Center block. But we haven't seen development on either one of those blocks, and I haven't heard or seen any other kind of maps for any other development.
Mr. Ross. I think Councilwoman Gibson summarized my frustrations exactly. I don't feel like there's anybody bringing together a common plan at all. Every time I ask more questions, I get more rabbit trails in my head. So now I have 2 more questions. So David, I have to ask you, as the director of the utilities, if we had a catastrophic damage to downtown overhead infrastructure, are you coming back to us asking for more overhead infrastructure, or are you triggering all the property owners the bill to reconnect?
I think we've tried to restore the overhead. Getting underground connections does not be anything we can do very quickly, because you've got major excavation issues, which you'll see photographs of some of the challenges here in a minute. We'd have to restore the overhead facilities.
We have to restore the overhead and tear it down.
That would be the only thing we could do very quickly.
No, I know, and this isn't problems that you've created, so I get it, but I'm not trying to put any blame on you at this point. And then you make a point that was just a minor point in your presentation, where we put in infrastructure and that becomes a super block, given property, whatever. I sympathize with the master developer. I do some of that myself. There's no way for him to know exactly where the super blocks are. So that kind of changes, especially over the amount of time we're talking about this is all going on. So, but we do put in a bunch of infrastructure, it becomes a super block. We've got $10 million in infrastructure, let's say, on that collected property. Do we have any kind of a vehicle to recover this cost? Does the new development shoulder any costs associated with our 2-year-old infrastructure that we're pulling out because there wasn't a plan? I mean, have we done any planning around putting in all this infrastructure and then have to yank it out? Is there a minimum time? Is there, in other cities I've built, in other cities in Lubbock, there's impact fees that you can roll those into to try to shoulder. Do we have any of that policy-wise, David?
We don't have a written policy that covers that. Our typical practice is if a customer requests relocation of existing facilities, we charge them the up and down cost of that changeover. Now, for a new development, those charges might be waived because you're getting new load in there that would offset the cost of whatever cost that you're adding. So, it'd be, like I said, we don't have a written policy on that. It's something Richard and I have been talking about here recently. We really need to develop some written policies on these charges and extension policies and things like that.
But wouldn't there be a pretty big difference in a relocation of services versus pulling out infrastructure on 6 smaller blocks to make a super block?
It's the same principle would apply. You're relocating existing facilities and replacing them with something different. So.
Mr. McGinnis, I apologize. I'm going to let you keep going, but I have one other question before I do that. The phase 1, the first slide you went over, everything's underground and it's energized, is that right? In
Correct.
phase one?
Yes, sir.
But of those 100 meters, only 5 have been converted. What does that mean? Does that mean that we have underground lines that are still going up some poles? How does that work exactly? I'm just trying to understand the system. So we still have overhead that's energized and underground that's
In
energized?
phase one, we do.
Okay.
And this fall in phase 2, we will.
Yes.
Just one big clear. Make sure I understand. Okay, all right. Does anybody else have a question for?
I have a quick one. Blair, aren't there some parts in phase 2, maybe 3, that the lines are already underground? For example, courthouse, county courthouse, federal building.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Jared says yes.
And have been for several years.
For several
They're coming off the existing aerial system.
Yeah.
At some point, there'll be riser going up.
Okay. Go ahead.
This is an example of the network system as well as an overhead system. This H-frame has a transformer sitting on top of it. There's also another one down about a block away. The network system primary comes in, goes to the transformer, step down, and is strung throughout the alley to customers. You can see the number of meters, you know, there's telephone, there's telephone, there's electricity, there's cable, there's all kinds of different things in this alley. The very same alley, in this, there's a manhole cover here. That's some other utility that goes down the alley. That's part of our challenge. You know, from that transformer, the system comes down the alley, jumps across, and then comes back to this set of meters right here. This will probably be a point that needs a secondary pedestal or a secondary pedestal. What's the
Enclosure.
enclosure? Secondary enclosure, because from this single supply, there are 7 meters that feed off that single supply. So we're not going to bring 7 different supplies down the alley. We'll bring one, set a secondary enclosure, and then at a very close proximity, and then feed those meters. But you can see from this alley that there's telephone poles on either side of it. There's very little room to do that.
Where would you put it?
That's hard to say. Sidewalk at the far end of the alley.
And then trench down back up.
Yes.
And then there's no CIP. That's a whole other CIP.
That's correct. That's the funding that is not covered in the CIP.
So in our job costs 92,
That's strictly to install in the conduit.
the trunk.
The
Yeah.
primary facilities.
Okay.
These are secondary facilities. Once it leaves the transformer, it's a secondary facility.
So, sorry to interrupt. You knew I was going to have a bunch of questions. Andy, this is kind of for you. Is it something that several years ago, before you were in your position here, is that something that LP&L should have caught? I mean, how many of these alleys are down here?
Well, it's a long history.
It certainly is.
You know, I think I'll go back a little bit, give a little, because I was on the city side, working on the TIF, before I came over here, and was involved with this TIF before, when all this was being discussed. But, the phasing that we saw in that initial map was the initial plan of what was where that conduit was going to be. And, the initial plans were there was going to be a lot of super blocks. There was going to be a lot of new construction downtown. A lot of the focus was on all the super blocks. And so there was never, from my remembrance, there was not a lot of discussion on the existing. When there was discussion, there was a lot of drama because obviously the legal issues surrounding who pays for it. And so I know there was a lot of discussions back and forth regarding that over time. So just due to the emotions and the drama that went on surrounding who pays for it, that kind of kept it getting put aside. But the real intent of the initial plan was to get that conduit in place. So upon the time that super blocks are created, or upon the time redevelopment occurs, it's ready to go. But there was never any discussion of timelines on when does LP&L need to phase out the existing infrastructure or anything of that nature. And so, we drug on for about 10 years now and it's a good point to discuss. I mean, we've got to make a decision, on what happens going forward. But so that's why there is no funding, because there has not been a mechanism created to fund this issue. We are not, as staff, I'm not going to put a budget in the budget, a capital program in the budget for something that we don't have the legal authority to spend that money on.
So
And so we've got to get to the point where an identified funding source is available, a legal funding source available, then we can at that point create a capital project to fund things like that if the council, if the board decides that's the direction we want to go.
So Andy, that helps me a lot. But let's take this one alley, which looks exactly like the alley behind where I've been for years and years. So you have to put a transformer at the end of the alley. You got a trench around current utilities. That's all just to get into this one alley. That's on the secondary side. That's on the LP&L side, just to get to the meter. Right. This doesn't take into the account the issues that I'm sure we're about to discuss as far as if there's a change of service or something that has to happen in the building. So to me, I'm asking two different questions. The capital improvement funding needs to run transformer, bury line, and get to those 7 meters, which is all on the LP&L secondary side. Say that's $100,000 per time. Say it's $1,000. That's separate to me than the $1,000 it takes inside one of those buildings to rewire because it's different service. So on the secondary side, there never was probably much discussion about anything but super blocks. So on the secondary side, are we looking at, I guess what I'm saying, am I understanding this correctly, we may be looking at 2 funding needs, one building in and the other sidewalk to meter in this example. I know it's already different every block, but is there a big LP&L funding need just to get our service down these alleys? And then also another, what we know is a funding need to change some of the buildings that are down there?
And I think that's a Jared or a Blair question. I'm not sure how far our funding goes. I mean, I don't know if it goes to that level.
Our funding, as far as the CIP,
Yep.
goes to that transformer right there.
Okay. So I guess you're right.
So
there are 2 sets of funding needs.
There's another funding need that we haven't ever really, I haven't certainly understood, and that's from that transformer you just put a dot on to that meter on the right-hand side of it.
That we would have to supply regardless.
That would be our responsibility anyway.
It's the LP&L secondary circuitry and equipment that goes along with it.
And so, do you ever lease rooftops? I mean, how do you start digging around the utilities if you didn't even know it was there?
You do, I'll tell you, in the oil and gas industry, you do a hydrovac. You come in and use jet water. You don't use a backhoe, or you either hand dig or you use a hydrovac around other utilities.
You have to, I guess. And so,
Still have the soft cutting of the concrete and patching it back.
so So, Mr. McGinnis, I guess the point I will make, and I'll let you get to the end of your presentation, is when you get to the point of saying how we're going to quantify the issue that I thought the issue was when we came into this meeting, now we've got to make sure that that contract or that task, future task that we may take up, includes this whole other side of how big does our capital improvement plan, our project need to be to get here.
That is part of what the contractor will provide for us during the next board meeting. With the numbers that they have, with the 604 meters, they're gonna go look at every meter and determine what type of voltage does that meter require, or what type of voltage does that customer require.
And how to get from current to there.
Well, what they're gonna do is provide the numbers to us and then provide somewhat of a budgetary number.
Well, that part hasn't been approved yet, but that's,
That's
that's survey
correct.
first. Once they come back with the survey information, we're gonna bring back another contract that the board can consider and act on, that would be to do an engineering estimate of the cost to get to the meters.
To get to the meters and then any other reconnection costs beyond.
Mr. Bell has a question.
Back, Andy, when you answered Clayton's question, there may be other funding sources, but simplify it, let's use that, say we got $1,000. If that $1,000 was funded out of the LP&L budget versus the general fund of the city, if the ratepayers of LP&L are paying for that reconnect, then they would also pay the franchise fee and the pilot fee, right?
Yeah.
And then if it came out of the general fund, then they could deduct that off their taxes, and there wouldn't be a pilot or a franchise fee.
Yeah. The other advantage is from paying it out of that is the entire population of the city is paying for those connections, whereas only a subset of the population, being an LPNO customer, would be paying for the downtown. So that's another issue that you have to weigh. in
Kind of
that
more of a
discussion.
piling on of the hidden fees and hidden taxes that have been running for years in the city.
So, but you said reconnect, but I think the point Mr. Isom is making is there's more CIP
Yeah, I know.
that we know we would need to have just to get to the point of reconnection.
Just to get to the point
Just
to discuss
that.
reconnect.
And that's what you mean by two different parts.
It's part that's covered in the CIP right now to get you to the transformers, but it doesn't facilitate removal of any of the overhead lines, because that's where
Okay.
the safety
Okay.
issues from.
I'm just making sure I understand. Go ahead, Mr.
So one other point I think is just important to make is the entire city, including, I have commercial buildings that aren't downtown, you know, all of us paying bills out there are paying for two live, at least in phase one. It's really nice to have two live systems in phase one. We don't have it out at the embassy. You know, I mean, we're all paying for that. It's just a point that we've all got to realize the entire city is subsidizing a lot here. And will continue to.
The major expense, though, downtown has been funded by the TIP, which has been funded with tax increment financing. The actual increment generated by the property values downtown. So the big expense, the bearing of those conduit, is one side of the equation. The electric side, where we've actually taken the manpower and done that, now you're correct, that that's being borne by.
But you're not,
Yeah.
also, that comment's made on the assumption that that was the biggest expense.
Well, the conduit is a larger expense than what we pay today on electric infrastructure.
Right. We may be looking at something equal or larger as we really get off of the this side.
Is that any different than the whole city paying for the new fire stations and the roads? As you explained, there's just something.
It wouldn't be any different if you were building two fire stations on that street next to each other.
Other questions?
I have a question for David. You have a policy concerning new development, do you not? If someone's come in and scraped off the dirt and is developing, you've got a policy for that.
We charge $13.40 a foot for the underground.
So we're talking
For
really about
new
existing
underground.
buildings that are going to be redone, I guess, refurbished. Is that what we're really talking about?
You know, there's been a number of areas downtown that have gone in and remodeled, and so generally they bring the secondaries to our pad mount transformer in that case, and that works out great for us because they're responsible for all the excavation, all the conduit, all that. But, and we still have to find locations to put transformers, which is a challenge. I tried to get Mr. Dunn's parking spot for Red Docks, and he wouldn't give it. But, that's what works best. But, you know, I don't think the downtown area, all these old buildings are not gonna go away overnight and come in and be remodeled. So if we want to see the overhead lines go away, if we want to modernize the system downtown, we're gonna have to take the bull by the horns and make it happen. Yes, all there is to it.
And there's gonna be some of these that we spend the money to trench in the secondary service, and then 5-10 years later, that whole area may be sold and redeveloped entirely. I mean, that's gonna happen.
It's possible that you'll spend money that will be wasted because somebody will come in and develop a supermarket right behind you.
But we're gonna have to be dedicated to making this an overall solution. And there's gonna have to be ad hoc decisions as we go. We're gonna have to be dedicated.
But is it true, if they come in and redo that, then it's on their dime?
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
not necessarily wasted funds, we've got it development ready.
Right.
And if they choose to change that, then it's on their dime.
That would be right, but we would be spending some initial money.
Right.
At this point, we wanted to make it as efficient as possible and not do things twice.
Do you feel like we're getting there?
It's a very slow process, and I've only been in it 8 months.
That's a good answer.
Go ahead, Mr. McGinnis.
And that was it. I do have one more slide. That is the map that was used to bid Phase 3. And you can see Phase 3 is these checkerboard section that goes way up to the north and down to Avenue 19th Street. Yep. There's actually a backup slide.
Well, it's okay. Other questions, comments?
Just one last comment, we were talking about this, I don't know how big a consulting contract down the road, it's a possibility, just my thought is it makes more sense for that money to be spent on doing work than coming up with a study when the work may be done over many years of time. Sounds to me like a study, you get through with it, it's really nice, but a year from now, it'll be much different 3 years from now. I mean, if money's gonna be spent, let's spend it and getting the work done instead of studying it and more consulting fees.
One disadvantage in doing an upfront study on this big of an area that's going to take you, quite a while to do the work is that things will change as you go along, and so some of that work will not be valid by the time you get around to it.
But the CIP estimate, we can always back it in.
Yeah, we would be do some estimating, and we're going to have some better information out of what we've ever had once the survey is completed, and so we can take that and extrapolate it and come up with a pretty good estimate on it.
Any other questions, comments? I'm sorry, Clay.
No, David, so generally the plan forward from right now is what?
The plan forward from right now is to finish the survey work. I think we've got a meeting with SGS that's scheduled for later this week. We're going to go over and talk to them about what the board would like to do in the next phase of this project, which, as I understand it, y'all want to see a full-blown engineering cost estimate for doing the complete cut over the downtown area to get run the transformers to the meters, because that's part that we don't have.
I don't ever see that.
Well,
You
there's,
say y'all.
I've committed to bringing that back to the board, and y'all can approve it or
Take a look at that. So you do a full-blown engineering cost to get it to the meters.
Right.
And then also that will include an analysis of any kind of change in service issues that we have.
Like, so the voltages that are oddball voltages where we can't serve them with a standard, patent out transformer, those will require special attention. You'll have to either convert voltage inside the building, or you'll have to install a dry type transformer inside the building. Both of those will be special consideration type of scenarios, and that's, we'll know how many of those there are when the survey is complete, but we just want to know what the costs are associated with it.
Very good. Would we be able to be in a position next meeting to have an idea on what the cost would be to do that next
To
phase?
do the engineering work,
Engineering
to
study.
determine the cost of the construction. Yes, that's our goal, is to have it in resolution form with an not to exceed estimate of engineering cost to do that next phase work.
Before we determine who's going to pay for it?
Thank you, Dave. At that point, we'll determine who's going to pay for it, or more specifically, Jerry, if we are or not.
I think Richard's plan is to have it where we require both board and council approval. That way we will make sure that the council would be on board with it. Now, that doesn't necessarily decide the funding question.
Richard, I'm sorry. Just at the next meeting, we're going to have a resolution to go on to the next phase of engineering study. And it's this board's decision on whether or not, A, we could fund that, and if we could approve it and say we're going to pay for it ourselves, or not.
Correct.
We can't decide whether we're going to pay part of it, and then put that's the council's decision.
As contemplated now, Mr. Dyson, the resolution will require the joint approval of that task authorization by the city council. And so I would think at the board's pleasure, you could pass that resolution with some type of a pro rata payment obligation, and that would go to the council.
With a recommendation.
Just for the engineering services
Yes.
survey.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
No, I forgot. I think that's a great question.
All right. Any other questions? Anybody else got anything? All right. Let's go back to item 6 then. Thank you, Mr. McGinnis. I appreciate your patience. Mr. Hughes,
You're welcome.
appreciate your information. Very good. Item 6, presentation and discussion of the updated report by the Director of Electric Utilities or his designee regarding customer service, business center practices, procedures and policies, billing procedures, and LP&L staffing and performance. Mr. McCollum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are seeing some increased activity in the customer service office as college students are returning to town. You know, new service setups take a little longer, so we're seeing some longer call times. We do have credit card and pay by phone options now in the lobby, so that should offer conveniences for some folks. 3 new commercial customers on the project list on page 16. The outage report is a follow-up, which is on page 18. We had talked about what that blue bar included. That blue bar that sticks up there pretty high is primarily fuses. When the fuse is blown, they categorize that as a component failure. So we had some thunderstorm activity in June and July that had quite a few fuses that were blown. I did want to report. This is not in the packet, but I did want to report on the results of our time of use program for the month of July. We had 16 customers that are participating in this program, up 16 meters. Some of them have multiple. There's not that many customers, some of them have multiple meters. We were able to achieve 4,239 kW in savings, which, since we have a demand charge that's based on our peak demand, that would save us a significant amount of money that we're also passing on to these customers with this time of use program. So most of that was one large customer, and then it's about 3,600 was attributable to one large customer, and the rest of the other 600 was attributable to the other remaining customers, including 2 City of Lubbock water treatment plants that participated. Saw some real savings there, so it's been a
So
good.
basically, you work with them on when to use their power to where it's most advantageous for them and for us.
Right. What we do is, our fuel charge for commercial customers has a demand component.
Right.
And since that is a direct pass-through from SBS, the way that our rate is set up is that we just do not charge them that demand charge for any demand that they use outside the on-peak window. The on-peak window is from 1 to 7. That's when we're always going to set our peak demand. So we charge them for the demand that they use in that on-peak window only on the fuel component. So if they reduce their peak demand on peak, it results in savings to us that we can pass on. I didn't explain that very well.
No, you did.
So it's been a pretty successful program. And then on page 21, we included an org chart of the main functional areas of the utility. With some of the key supervisors and managers. So I had one board member that requested that we put that in the packet. So if you have any questions on that, I'd be happy to.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Russell?
So you don't trust Matt Rose to be over here? That's a question.
To avoid any possible grievances, I think I will knock him out.
You could have withdrawn that
It's withdrawn.
That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman, unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCall. Any questions for Mr. McCall? So I noticed, I've got a comment, maybe a question, on page 19. You may have been going over this while I was looking through. So our maximum demand in July was on July 13th,
That's correct.
when the temperature hit 107.
Right.
And that's 615.
Yeah, no, that's reading from our SCADA system. If you look at the actual bill we received from Excel, it's a different number, but that's.
Right. Okay.
Put that in perspective. We have 107-degree temperature and we use 650 megawatt. If we stay in the SPS grid, they're going to make us have 740 megawatts of capacity. I guess if we have to save for the day when it gets to be 130.
Yes. All right, any other questions, comments about the director's report? Again, thank you, Mr. McCollum. We'll move on to item 7, presentation and discussion of financial and capital statements, financing options, audits, and financial policies of Lubbock Power and Light relating to debt issuance issues, reserve account funding, cost allocation, and revenue expense projections of Lubbock Power and Light. Mr. Sales?
Sir. Before Chad starts, I just want to brag on him a little bit. The last 2 years, Chad's been working full-time for us, and he's also been working on an MBA at Texas Tech, and this weekend he graduated with a 4.0. So we're happy to have his full attention back on us. No, we're very proud of him for doing that.
Is that on a 10 scale? Or?
Yes. Yeah, I forgot to mention that, yes.
Now he's got to pay the loans for that.
That's right. All right. Well, let's jump right into this. We'll start where we normally do. You guys are used to seeing the over-under collection and the rate stabilization. So our customers right now are paying about $100, just a little over $100 through the summer season. Just to remind you, this time last year, our customers were paying about $110, and this summer they're paying about $100. The majority of that coming in savings from pass-through. We always like to layer in Xcel Energy and where they're at in comparison to ourselves. And so for the last 2 months, they've been at $108 all in. And this is all for, rate 1 residential customer using 1,000 kWh. Then we like to layer in how do we compare to the state? And so overall in the state, we're still lower by about $5.50. over the last couple of years. Since we implemented rate stabilization in December of 14, our customer has saved over $200 as opposed to if they were with Excel, and across the state about $270. So each month we report on the status of the over-under collection of pass-through, and this graph represents our pass-through through July. Also, each July, Excel performs a true-up on their wholesale power costs for the previous calendar year. So in this case, we're talking about 2015. Since I've worked here, which was January of 13, we've seen true-ups in our favor to the tune of about $800,000. To the highest that I had seen was a little over $1 million in Excel's favor. So we had our meeting with Excel through the production true-up meeting, and we were in for quite a shock when we found out that our true-up was over $4 million this year. So we built in about $1 million into our pass-through rates when we went into our summer rates. We certainly weren't expecting a $4 million true-up. So basically, they break down the true-up into demand cost, energy cost, and then interest. So just want to walk you through kind of how this works. You can see here on the left, we have the months of 2015. We have our billing determinants, the kilowatts here. This is the actual usage, and this is WTMPA usage, so it's a little bit higher than LP&L, but you can assume that we're going to pay 95 to 97% of these costs just based on our load. What we were billed is between $6.70 and $7.08 per kW. And then when they go back and true up their costs from 2011, you can see pretty significant differences. Not so much in the first half of the year, but July through December, pretty significant differences. So the demand component makes up $1.5 million, which is in and of itself higher than anything that we've seen in some time, maybe ever. The energy works the same, just different billing determinants, different rates. You have your megawatt hours that we used, what we were billed, their true-up rates, the variance, and then you just multiply the variance times the megawatt hours to see the energy revenues that make up the other portion of this true-up. So they also go back, and this is all contractual, they go back and charge us interest on that $3.9 million for since 2015. So it's just about $4.1 million. And so what we did, this obviously raised some red flags for us. As soon as we saw this, we worked with and through WTMPA to hire an expert consultant to review SPS's work. So MCR Performance Solutions out of Illinois came highly recommended by WTMPA's attorney, and not Mr. Davidson as WTMPA's attorney, but their federal and FERC-related attorney, which is Spiegel and McDermott out of Washington, D.C. So MCR came highly recommended from them as formula rate experts, specifically in SPP. So MCR reviewed the 2015 true-up and confirmed SPS's numbers. And when I say that, they reviewed it and confirmed it, FERC has a very specific template that applies to WTMPA and then the other wholesale customers that they have to follow. So what MCR did, they went through all of the files that are associated with that FERC-approved template in order to confirm those numbers. And so one of the reasons we wanted to hire MCR is if you've ever seen one of these filings, it's an Excel file with probably 100 tabs and everything's linked. And the limited staff we have here, we just don't have the time or the expertise to dig into that. So that's why we wanted somebody that does this all the time to dig into it. So essentially what they found was a combination of higher operating costs and capital costs with lower load in 2015. And so essentially to set a rate, it's just a basic fraction. You have a dollar amount and then you divide it by your billing determinant, whether that's megawatt, whether that's energy or demand. And so both of those parts of the fraction worked in the wrong direction. So cost went up and the load went down. So we didn't have as much load to spread that across. And as we all know, 2015 was quite a bit cooler. Once you kind of break all this down and look at it, it does seem to kind of shake out. So one thing that we do need to note is that other customers that are wholesale customers with SPS were also impacted to the same magnitude. So we weren't singled out. So how's this going to impact us? We will adjust the pass-through rates starting in the winter. We don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction as we end up through the summer. We'll recover the additional cost over the winter season, which will be October through May, and that will, we typically have lower loads, and it will be easier on the customers to recover that cost over the 8 months rather than a 4-month summer season. So in terms of the financials, that's going to reduce our cash balances, but not overly concerned since we have a pass-through mechanism. We can true that up and get those back in line. And then the income statement's not going to be impacted as we will recognize those revenues in the appropriate year that they were earned. So,
Chad, real quickly.
Sure.
Did you guys look at trying to take that from the reserves rather than passing that cost on to ratepayers?
No.
Any reason why?
Basically, that's how the reserve is. That's the purpose of, the pass-through is to be a mechanism for us to absorb volatility on the customer's behalf. And so you can see all the volatility throughout since we've been doing this since October 13, and I guess the way I understand it, that's our responsibility through the pass-through rather than eating at the reserves.
And those are related specifically to purchase power cost, and so the tariff is written where we exactly pass through the cost to our customers. So it's a tariff issue. You'd have to amend the tariff if you didn't want to exactly pass through those costs to our customers, but that's kind of the marching orders that we're going to do. And obviously, we're going to be managing this volatility. As you'll see in a moment, we're going to dip well into our reserves right now, and we'll gradually have to build that back up to where we reinstate our reserves in next year. It's one of those things where we're managing the volatility to our customers. Historically, next month we would have had an enormous increase for our rate customers, and if we can spread that over a number of months, it really won't be that impactful to our customers.
Now, Chad, the way I look at that is that basically more than absorbs our deferred revenue figure that we were working.
Yes, it's gone.
Well, there you go. That's what, this is what our pass-through looks like without the $4 million true-up. You can see that when we lowered rates in February, that those green bars are trending downwards just like we planned. What we didn't plan for was the $4 million under collection. So
anytime we're below that black line, we have dipped into our reserves. That $3.5 million reserve is that blue bar. And so anytime that blue bar is diminished, that means we've dipped into those reserves. And we would even anticipate looking at forward pricing right now, we'll probably even dip below that reserve. We'll lead into more of our general reserves over the next several months until things cool off and we start rebounding.
But we'll recalibrate that figure for the winter. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's the way we designed the system to work. We're surprised the numbers that large, but we were working off of that anyway.
Yeah, this was a surprise, but we're still going to continue.
Customer's responsibility ultimately because they use the power that we didn't charge them for because SPS didn't charge us for it.
So we've taken the volatility from the customer and put it on me and Andy. So I about had a stroke last week when we were working on this. So on to better news. The financial statements start on page 22. The balance sheet, I'll go through this fairly quickly. I know that we've had a long day. A couple of items worth mentioning. Cash and investments are down. This is comparing June fiscal year to date to our last audited data in September. Cash is down about $2.2 million. Receivables are down about $5.3 million. Both of those are normal in terms of where we are in our seasonal financials. So as As it continues to get hotter, we see a peak of cash and receivables at the end of September, which makes sense because that's the end of our fiscal year. So the other thing that is good news is our capital assets have finally begun to outpace our depreciation. And you can see the capital assets are up about $1.9 million relative to this time in the fall. So on the liability side, the deferred revenue that Mr. Taylor mentioned, we were at 2.2 million over collected at fiscal year end. Right now through June, we're about 3.7. As I showed you, we've already kind of taken a peek into July. It won't look like this next month. So customer deposits, something I do want to I like to brag on, is we have reduced our customer deposits by 1.7 million according to the balance sheet, but we've refunded over $2.2 million to our customers since we implemented this program. And then obviously as new customers have come on, we've needed to require deposits from them of about $450,000. So sorry, one last thing. Net position, we're down about $1.1 million, and I'll actually touch on that more on the income statement. You can see operating revenues are down about $6.3 million relative to the same time last year. Both of these numbers are through June of the fiscal year. Everything is pretty much staying in line, the exception of purchased fuel and power. You can see that it's down about $9.5 million, which, if you think about that, that shows us that our pass-through model is working, because we're over collected 3.7 according to the balance sheet. The difference between that 6.3 in operating revenues and the 9.5 in the expenses is about 3.2. So that just means that our other revenues are just down by about $500,000. But that shows us that if you incorporated the over collection back into our operating revenues, that it's right in line with the purchase power. So let's see. On the supplies, maintenance, and other, that's really the only line item in our control that's up $385,000. We have lots of expenses this year that we didn't last year. PWR Solutions, we did a FERC accounting study. We've seen some higher water charges very early in the year to run cook steam units, and then our friends at Dilco. So this time, compared to this time last year, we've improved by about $62,000. So we're right about where we would expect to be in terms of net position.
Mr. Sales, let me stop you right there.
Yes,
So
sir.
if you go back to that slide, so on personal services, which would include our personnel,
Yes.
we're basically under what we had done at the same time last year.
Yes, sir.
Very good.
In terms of our budget, comparing June of 15-16 to the budget, you can see that revenues are at 60% of budget, and this same time last year we were at 61.5%. On the expense side, we're at 63%, actually a little bit lower than last year at 66%. So it's just another indicator that things are ticking along as we would have anticipated. Capital program, our cash funds, we have about 27% remaining out of this $37 million. We have 75 appropriated, we have 37 remaining. A little over 10 million or 27% is in cash, the difference is in bonds. This month we spent $1.3 million, 1.1 of that was related to distribution, and we had 17 projects that actually spent money out of our 48 total. Something I do want to talk about real quickly is temperatures and how load is impacted. Mr. Dunn actually touched on this a second ago, talking about high temperatures and the high load. And we've all seen our July bills come in, and they're significantly higher than we're probably used to. And so we put this together just to show how does 2016 and summer compare to years in the past. So 2016 is kind of the orange line that's tracking here, and you can see a spike from June to July. But here's a 5-year average is the green line in terms of our temperatures, and 2016 is just kind of ebbing and flowing right along where you'd expect, and then you see July, and it just kind of bursts through that ceiling of the 5-year average. 2011 was the hottest year that we've had on record ever. 2015 was the coolest in the last 5 or 6. And so 2016, you can see once we hit about April, we have been significantly above last year. But July in particular matched our hottest July on record. And so 2016, we had an average max temperature of 99 degrees compared to last year we had 92. And so you can see year to date, our KWH is about the same, only about a 0.5% difference. But for July, we were 4% higher, and the temperature was 7 degrees higher. So just wanted to kind of touch on this, just to remind everybody that as temperatures goes up, so does usage related to air conditioning load. So that's pretty much all I had. Glad to answer any questions.
Mr. Sales, on the statement of cash flows on page 25, just want to make sure where we have the cash flows from non-capital and related financing activities, the second category there, down from the operating activities. So that transfer out to other funds is $10.3 million. That includes franchise fee, pilot, all the things that we transfer to the general fund.
And indirect cost allocation.
And the indirect cost allocation.
And then our transfer, well, that would be internal, so yeah, just those two.
Okay. Is it net of the transfer back, or is it?
The transfer back.
Well, don't we have some?
Oh, the 80, yes, yeah, we get about 83,000 a year from the city on paying for a dispatcher, and then we're reimbursed. I don't think they actually handle that through
Through the transfer.
Okay. Reimbursement.
Well, I again applaud you all for putting this in financial statements, because it makes it very clear where our money is coming from and where it's going.
Sure.
I appreciate it very much.
Well, again, Teresa Larson is the one that does the heavy lifting on that, so.
Thank you for this. Appreciate it.
Any other questions?
Chad, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're to the consent agenda. Item 9 is consider resolution authorizing the chairman of the Electric Utility Board to execute certain interlocal agreement by and between the city of Lubbock, acting by and through the city council and the Electric Utility Board and the county of Lubbock related to access to portions of the city of Lubbock's utility database for legitimate law enforcement activities. Somebody want to pull any of those, just sing out. Item 10,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Ison.
this was the interlocal agreement that I believe Charlie was looking at, so let's see.
Yes, this meets all the criteria that I wanted them to put in it to protect the privacy of our ratepayers, but allow law enforcement to do their job. And I think this agreement does both of those.
So this is the agreement between us and the city and the county and everything.
Item 10 is consider a resolution authorizing the purchasing manager to execute a sole source purchase order to Advanced Control Systems Inc. for NTX substation controllers. And I believe that's the only 2 items on the motion.
I approve the consent agenda.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. All right, that brings us to item 11. We'll be adjourned.